Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Kravickas, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Digital Futures Flashpoint series sponsored by the UC Office of Research. This is the 11th edition in our series, and today we'll be focused on threats to biodiversity and what cities, organizations, and citizens can do together at the local level to mitigate local and global decline. We have an incredible panel lined up for you featuring local policymaker, councilperson Mika Owens, the renowned 92nd naturalist and Cincinnati Zoo director Thane Maynard, and UC's own Joe Johnson, a leading figure in Ohio's wildlife conservation efforts. My hope is that the panel discussion today will inspire you to explore opportunities to foster a positive relationship with our environment and contribute to local efforts in promoting a sustainable future for all. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Jay Shabria, who has served as chief strategist to former Ohio Governor John Kasich, and is currently the Ohio Office Director for MAD Global Strategy, a national public strategy firm. So thanks, Jay. I'll turn it over to you.
Jen, thanks for kicking this off and, obviously helping create this great platform. For the Flashpoint series, it's kind of an embodiment of what Digital Futures is. It's about talking about things that some of the research that we do at UC that solves problems that matter. It's about taking research out of the ivory tower and into our homes and really trying to make it so that understand what we do at UC. And we have a fascinating topic today. It deals with something that's right under our nose. It's the topic of urban wildlife. It's something that we all, when we're walking around the city or looking at it out of our homes and we see it, but we don't really think about it in those terms of urban wildlife. At least I don't. And as Jen mentioned, we've got a terrific set of panelists here to talk about it today. So first is Joe Johnson. He is an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati, and he uses sensors to study animal population, primarily bats. And we'll get more into his research, but this whole topic was really his brainchild and really something that he brought to us to really talk about and highlight. Thane Maynard, you may have seen him on media all over the country. He is a global thought leader. He is the executive director of the world famous Cincinnati Zoo, and he's authored over a dozen books. I'm thrilled to have you on, Thane. You're going to have a really fascinating perspective to this, so thank you. And Mika Owens, she's a rising political star. She's serving as her first term in Cincinnati City Council, and she also chairs the Climate, Environment, and Infrastructure Committee. So she's got this really interesting viewpoint about how we can actually effectuate change, because policymakers are the ones that are on the front lines here. If you have questions for any of our panelists, we're going to ask them throughout the conversation. Please drop your question in the chat to Amy Latessa, who's on the chat. She's serving as our moderator, and she's going to make sure she gets them to me, and we can try to ask as many as we can. We're going to get right to it and get right into the conversation. We've got about an hour here. Joe, I'm going to start with you. This is obviously the topic you highlighted for us, and I want to know what makes you so passionate about the topic of urban wildlife.
Well, first, let me say thanks, Jay, and thanks, Jennifer, and the whole UC Office of Research and the university in general for organizing this event. And of course, thanks to Shane and Mika for joining me on the virtual panel today. It's pretty cool to get the opportunity to be here with you both and to speak to everybody. So when I think about what makes me passionate about urban wildlife is the opportunity to take what many people see as maybe a conflict, or in some cases just not important at all, and to turn it into a really valuable opportunity to make positive change. So I think a lot of people probably think about urban wildlife maybe in the sense of some extreme examples that you might see on the news, something like a deer accidentally wandering into the grocery store or the coyote on the highway. But really, it's much broader than that. It's all of the animals that are able to tolerate our human densities in our cities, in our suburbs, right? It includes the birds that might only migrate through the area for a couple of weeks in the spring or in the fall. It includes the bats in the church attic. It includes here in Cincinnati, all of the species that live in and on the banks of the Ohio River. And really, it's the opportunity that excites me, the opportunity to be able to take advantage of the fact that we have many species right here with us, and we can work to conserve those populations. We can work to celebrate those populations and take some of the burden off of our wilderness areas and our natural preserves to do all the work for us, so to speak, when it comes to biodiversity conservation. That we right here as citizens in the city can do so much positive good and be able to really move us closer to our global sustainability goals, which does include celebrating our natural heritage in our cities. And so that's what really makes me excited about this topic.
And you run a world-class zoo. I mean, everyone knows the Cincinnati Zoo. You've got a famous hippo. There's all kinds of things that you bring to the table. But one of the unique things or different things about the Cincinnati Zoo is it's actually situated in an urban area. I mean, it's just it's what, a couple miles from where I'm sitting right now. How do you think about this issue of urban wildlife, given that fact?
Well, thanks, and thanks certainly for having me as part of this panel. This is a fun discussion. The question of biodiversity is essential. The great thing is it can play an important role in people's lives very easily. But when we think globally, it couldn't be more important. I think the two big challenges that humans face here in the 21st century are climate change, of course, but also the loss of biodiversity. And to have people spend more time outdoors, have people get a better understanding of the nature around us is the best step forward. Because people learn about and care about national parks like Yellowstone or wild areas like the Amazon, but very rarely get to go there or have any kind of impact there. But right where we live, we can in fact have an impact. And when most people think about it, we can see that biodiversity around us over the decades has declined. That's because of development or maybe mismanagement, but it also is very resilient. And so things as simple as planting pollinator gardens or getting involved in your community and neighborhood gardens are a good first step. And when you do those, it will be amazing how quickly you see a bigger abundance of pollinating insects like butterflies and bees, pollinating birds and songbirds and seed eaters. And those are things that happen very, very quickly. I promise anyone listening, if you plant common milkweed, in very quick order, you will start to see eggs laid and caterpillars for monarch butterflies. And if you plant it right now, even this fall, you'll see monarch butterflies that may very well hatch out of a chrysalis right near your house. Those kinds of things have an immediate impact and do help, in fact, things like migrating butterflies, but they also play a role in getting us to start to pay attention to what's around us. The importance of biodiversity cannot be overstated. Biodiversity is what holds the world steady. When we start to say, gosh, the climate's weird and gosh, everything's changing on us. Part of that is as we destroy natural areas around the world, we are changing the system that in fact holds the world steady. So on a global level, governments are involved, big organizations are involved, but on a local level, there are myriad ways that people in the tri-state or wherever you're watching from, where you can get involved. So it's an exciting topic, and I think an exciting time in the Cincinnati region. There's greatly increased interest.
That's fascinating, and I'm going to go get some milkweed to plant right after this. I mean, these are the practical tips that I'm psyched about here too. Mika, you're a legislator. You have to be a generalist when you do that, and Thane just talked about that local part of what we can all do. How do you think about an issue like this? It's not one of those kitchen table issues necessarily. It's not something that, it's not tax policy. It's not those kinds of things that we normally associate with legislators. But how do you think about this when it's not necessarily the highest priority for your constituents?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I want to say thank you, Jay, for the invitation to be here and UC Research, Office of Research, and my esteemed panelists. I am so excited to be with you all. As a legislator, I am kind of in the center of a few things that I think these topics traverse individually, but they also are, kind of interface with one another as well. And so that means as a city council member, one of my most important roles is allocation of budget. And so how are we investing in initiatives that are about protecting and expanding green space, that are about climate initiatives? How are we supporting other organizations through the buckets of money that we have the ability to do that kind of get to this end goal? But where's that goal? How are we accountable to that goal? Well, Cincinnati, we have a leg up from other cities where we actually have a Green Cincinnati plan, which is our sustainability blueprint in so many areas of how we reduce carbon emissions. And so that can be from buildings and emissions to transportation to how we access food. And so what does community gardens look like? And again, that goes back to allocation of resources at the community level. So the Green Cincinnati plan is a foundation for being able to make these kind of decisions. concerns that, yes, at the end of the day, we're not thinking about how are we protecting and expanding green space, but it's all a part of our measurement tool within this body of work. The other piece is about policy and legislation as it relates to the built environment. And so when we think about multimodal transportation in the city and how we're reducing cars on the road and land reclamation when possible and using land in the most effective way, how are we looking at, again, home ownership, value of that in terms of, if you're going to put a biodiverse or a garden in your home, how can that increase your home value, plus help us get to our climate goals? And then finally, it's really about systems and collaboration. And so how are systems like local government, the education system, and other organizations that are supporting this work, how are we all talking with one another to be able to achieve these lofty goals?
That's a great perspective. Thane, I recently saw a quote. It said, conservation is not just about human biodiversity, but about the human relationship with biodiversity. I'd like you to actually reflect on that, but also, we when you were talking about urban wildlife, it could be coyotes or it could be something else. What do humans need to think about when they're actually interacting with wildlife, in their backyards?
Well, certainly, as you said, there's a human impact on biodiversity that can't be overstated. And that's been growing and growing as human population grows. And because we live in a city, certainly urban areas particularly have that impact. That's one reason it's so great. We have the park system we have through great parks, through Cincinnati parks, through others in regional parks, and also the network of green areas. Those can be creek beds and tree lots that sort of serve as corridors for all those animals to move. And they do, as you said, there are coyotes right here in the urban core. And obviously deer, everybody sees deer, but, in general, I would say give them some space, drive carefully, particularly during the fall in terms of deer, especially if you're out in the country. Try to avoid coyotes. They're not going to hurt you, but they're tough as heck on small dogs. So pay attention to that as well. Wouldn't leave a small dog out if you live in a great big lot or great big yard. But in general, those animals are not a danger to us. I think more important is the understanding of, though we know of famous endangered species like previously the peregrine falcon, say, that comes through and lives in our region, or bald eagle in the day. Thank goodness they're off the endangered species list. But the endangered species list right here in the tri-state still exists. And sometimes it has species you wouldn't expect. I know Joe knows better than I, but that includes bat species that live right in our area, freshwater mussel species, salamanders and other species that are threatened often because of changes to our water systems or pollution in those areas. And all those things require a determined effort, but it's an important one. To me, the most important thing that people can remember is that conservation is a win-win. A perfect example, I mentioned the bald eagle. When I moved to Ohio 40-something years ago, there were no bald eagle nests in the whole state. The Cuyahoga River caught on fire, and polluted rivers were killing animals and frankly killing us because we drink out of those rivers. Thanks to the Clean Water Act, thanks to other Clean Air, Bald Eagle Protection Act, Endangered Species Act, bald eagles and other species are back. So why do I mention that? Well, we get our drinking water out of the Ohio River. And 40 years ago, the bald eagles didn't nest anywhere near the Ohio River. Thankfully, because of those laws, the river is cleaner and bald eagles are nesting throughout our region, dozens of nests on the Little Miami River, the Whitewater River, the Great Miami River, and right on the Ohio River itself. So yes, it's good for the fish that the eagles eat. Yes, it's good for the eagles. Just as importantly, it's good for us, because there is no way it was healthy for us in the 1970s to be drinking out of that river. Filters or not, it's much healthier today. So protecting these systems are vital to our future. And conservation really doesn't mean just protecting pandas or pythons. It also means protecting people.
It's really fascinating. And I'll make a little plug. We had an earlier Flashpoint, I think it was last year, about the state of the Ohio River, and how and now when I hear about this and how all of that relates directly to urban wildlife and biodiversity, that's pretty fascinating that we can make those kind of connections. So check out our Digital Futures YouTube page if you're watching and you want to hear a little bit more about the Ohio River. Joe, that was a little bit of segue. Do you want to talk about bats at all? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, if I might, I just want to comment on both what Mika and Thane said. First of all, I think those two comments that they both made are very connected. We talked about cleaning up the Ohio River and, nationally Clean Air and Clean Water Act. And I think we can look back on those pieces of legislation with gratitude. And I think we have the opportunity to look back at our local movement of our Green Cincinnati plan with some gratitude as well, that we're not just waiting for national and global effort, that we're taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, right here in our own city to do a lot of good. And I think if we commit to that, I think we'll be able to look back on that plan with similar gratitude. And I am so grateful that we have people in our local government who care about those things. And when I think about interacting with biodiversity and with wildlife, one thing that I think about the excitement for this topic is that when we want to make a difference with threatened and endangered wildlife, that, like Thane said, we don't have to go always, although we should, to Yellowstone, to the tropics, but we can do it right here. Unfortunately, if people aren't aware, we have a very bad track record, as a planet, of having species that were once very common become very rare very quickly. And that's happened with bats, that's happened with our reptiles and amphibians. And a lot of this happens when we introduce plants or pathogens or other animals from one environment into another. And while that part of the story is pretty horrible, the part that to me is exciting, and I have to focus on the positive in order to, live in 2023, is we say, these critters, like bats that can live in an attic, that can live in a bat box in the same way that birds can live in bird houses, is we can do a lot right here to promote those endangered populations. Here in Cincinnati, and we're thinking about the green spaces around us, we have 3 federally endangered bat species, and that assumes you include the tricolored bat, which is meant to be or will be added in September of this year. So we have 3 federally endangered bat species, and that to me is a fantastic opportunity, but it's one that we have to take advantage of. It's not something that we can take for granted, because if we don't take advantage of the opportunity, we'll lose it.
Thanks for shining a light on that. Again, I think that's something that probably people will start to look into after this kind of thing. That's what we're trying to do, shine a light on this stuff. Mika, I want to talk a little bit about young people here. I know that's obviously a focus oftentimes of politicians and elected officials. How do you look at this? Because if we can hook young people into an issue like this is something that'll stay with them for the rest of their life. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that comes through a variety of touch points for young people being involved in this work. And one, when we set our goals for this last iteration of our Green Cincinnati plan, which it's updated every 5 years, what was important to me is adding young people and their voice and their opportunity to be at the table. And so for the first time ever, we created a Youth Environmental Council. And so you got engaged young people that are passionate about this issue and having the opportunity to interface with local government and really voice their concerns. And not only that, but solutions, because they, not to sound, utopian, but they are the future. And so when we're thinking about the stewards of green space in the future, technology, investment in startups, entrepreneurs, we have to make space for them. And so we are already seeing them really engaging in this work by saying, okay, let's take this lofty Green Cincinnati plan and let's distill it down to something that is like a bullet point, or something that young people can quickly assess and even want to get more involved. And so it's exciting to see that work kind of grow. Going back to how we allocate resources in the city, we are working with organizations like Groundwork Ohio River Valley, who are hiring young people over the summer to be stewards of green space, to clean up invasive species. They hired over 77 young people in this last summer. And so we're happy to be able to partner in that way. And then finally, I think it's the work when we're thinking expansively and broadly and what other cities are doing. And we're looking at national trends around green schoolyards and how school systems are coming together with local government to, really see what access looks like in those public spaces, not only as educational spaces for young people to be outdoors and learning about nature, but also, how can we leverage that the community also has benefit to that as well. So that's how I see those young people being a part of this conversation.
Joe, Mika brings up some really interesting points on how she interacts. How do you think about it? Why is urban wildlife and biodiversity, why is it important for young people?
Well, I think Mika really hit it right on the head, right? It's their planets. And I think right now, if we pay attention to the headlines, we have young people petitioning the Supreme Court, petitioning the United Nations, and making their voice heard in a way that, as the previous generation, I am humbled by to hear the younger people do something that I never would have thought was possible when I was their age. And I think what it comes down to is we've as researchers, as Congress people, as folks who are organizing and running our zoos and our conservation organizations, we're sending the message right to them. And we're saying, hey, this is going to be yours to inherit. This is what's happening. And not only are we painting the sky is falling picture, but instead we're giving them potential solutions, and we're giving them tools, and we're trying to be solution oriented and giving them the language, we're giving them the science, and we're giving them the encouragement to make that world a better place. And so, I think the inclusive message that we're bringing young people to the table is so critical.
Thane, my kids love the Cincinnati Zoo, so they're frequent. They frequently go there. How do you communicate with young folks to say the stuff around you every day? It's not just Fiona the hippo. It's everything else too is really important.
Well, zoos, of course, are for everybody. Everybody that goes to Kroger or Walmart goes to the zoo. So that's a neat thing in that we reach a tremendously broad spectrum of people that live throughout the tri-state, as well as visitors from elsewhere. So that's a neat opportunity to reach all kinds of people. Naturally, we have a huge education program. It starts at 18 months old with stroller safaris, and it can go all the way through getting a master's degree through the zoo. We have a full-time high school. It's been here 48 years. It's
Wow.
through CPS. It's called the Zoo Academy. And that's a really neat program, taking teenagers and giving them opportunities. We have a number of employees here who went through that program. What I'm excited about on this whole session is that it's happening right here in Cincinnati. And,
Right.
Mika's Green Cincinnati plan, Joe's work on biodiversity through the university, as well as other biology professors, because I think it's based on a simple premise, which is, hey, if conservation can work in Cincinnati, it can work anywhere. And that sounds a little silly, but I'm sure Mika hears from others, colleagues of hers from the coast. Joe might as well. I hear from zoo directors in groovy places like, say, Seattle and Portland and San Francisco, and they say, oh, you guys are in the Rust Belt, man. You don't even know what green is. And the truth is, in our practical Midwest way, I think Cincinnati, and I know the zoo is, showing what is possible. Our zoo is proud to be recognized as the greenest zoo in America. That is entirely based on 17 years ago, hiring Mark Fisher. He's a civil engineer, and he got us to quit wasting water and start using rainwater. I don't know if people know, but for instance, Fiona and all the other aquatic animals that do swim in rainwater. We have huge catchment basins, and all of our moats and waterfalls and most of our irrigation is rainwater. And that saved us so much money because water bills are very expensive that we were able to retrofit all our HVAC and make it green, all our lighting and make it green. And we've been able to demonstrate, you can actually save money if you do things smarter. That's what it's going to take, certainly going forward. There are an awful lot of people in the world, so we're going to have to figure out how to use resources, use energy, produce food, and do it smarter. I think locally, the idea of people getting involved, particularly young people, there's so many good ways today. People malign cell phones and how much time we spend on them, but these are actual miracle machines. A few apps that if people are not familiar with them, I promise you would have the time of your life going outside. iNaturalist, you can take a picture and it'll help identify anything you see. You think, what plant is that? What snail is that? What mushroom is that? There's another great one called Picture This. eBird is a remarkable opportunity to learn from others what birds are being sighted in your area. And you can even record the ones you saw. And a personal favorite called Merlin, like the bird Merlin, is from Cornell Ornithology Lab. And you can hold that out your door in the morning any day, and it will tell you what birds are singing in your yard. and it's mind-boggling. And if you wait to do it until late April, early May, you just won't even believe, because the birds that fly through are very loud and very abundant at that time. But even this time of year, I think people will be surprised with the use of simple things like that, with pictures and audio, how much biodiversity exists, not all the way to West Virginia. I mean, it exists right on your street.
Right here in where we're living, which could be in a city or could be in a suburban setting. It's amazing when you really think about it from those terms. We have our first question from the audience, and if you have a question, please drop it in the chat to Amy Latessa, and she'll get it over to us. And we're going to try to ask as many of them as possible. This one has to do not necessarily with, actually, it's more with flora than fauna, but this is from Arnie. Among the threats to local biodiversity or invasive species, honeysuckle might be among the best known, but there are many others. Is there a way to work with regional nurseries and other vendors to avoid selling non-native species and better inform city residents about what avoid? I don't know how big an issue for this is for you, but I'll let Joe, why don't you take it first? And if anyone else has anything to chime in on this, I'd love to hear from you.
So there's a lot that we can do, and I'm excited for Thane to talk about some maybe local pollination and plant resources here in just a moment. But they're absolutely, Thane mentioned the miracle device of the phone, but also the internet. I think about bats a lot and the native species that we can promote that will then promote the animal species that depend on those plants. If you Google, gardening for bats, Bat Conservation International has a website where they have lists of flowers, including those that are present here in Ohio and native to Ohio, like the purple cone flower, species of goldenrod. So really, you could reach out to your local nursery, but absolutely get online. You can look at the National Wildlife Federation, I believe, has a searchable tool that will tell you what plants are native to your area. And you can simply rely on the fact that if you are identifying and if you are planting native plants, then you can sit back and say, I am doing something very excellent for the vertebrate species and the invertebrate species that depend on that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And through our botanical garden, we have a wide array of programs around planting for pollinators. You can even get your garden certified. We have thousands of folks, not just here in the tri-state, but around the country and the world, who have sent in pictures showing that they've planted native plants for pollinators. But it's a tricky thing, and I think that's probably why Arnie Miller asked this question. It's a learning curve for everybody. So even nurseries still have a bias toward, well, no, ma'am, you don't want those. You probably want to plant a lot of boxwoods, or you want to plant a lot of English ivy or pachysandra or whatever. When in fact, there's great satisfaction from planting native plants and great benefit. And you're right, we don't want more honeysuckle and honeysuckle-like plants taking over ecosystems. So there are a lot of resources. Locally, you can certainly look at the Cincinnati Zoo's website. Our horticulture team has tremendous lists of local plants that work in our area. We do great trials for that. You can visit our botanical garden and see. But a lot of it is that process of just discussing it. When you really learn about it, you become passionate about it, and you'll need to. You talk to your landscaper, because they're biased toward boxwoods too. Talk to the nursery you're familiar with. And it takes a lot of education, sometimes a little arguing and explaining that, no, I don't want to do that old system. I want to do a newer system. But people learn over time, and they'll learn also through the market. Our zoo botanical team has a great big native plant sale a couple times a year. Keep an eye on the zoo's website, and you'll see that takes place out at our farm. We have a big farm up in Warren County near Milford, and we grow all kinds of plants, tons of trees and hay to feed our animals, but also a lot of native plants as well for people to put in their own gardens and that we use here at the zoo. So it's an ongoing process, no doubt about it. That issue of introduced species is certainly one of the great pressures on endangered ecosystems everywhere.
And I think one thing to point out is, we can also teach those nurseries. They made an important point that there's a bias in those nurseries. They're responding to the market and what people have liked over time. But we have the example here in Ohio where we've recently banned, say, the Bradford pear. It's illegal to now sell, and I think that really comes from a grassroots effort of people telling their nurseries, telling their congresspeople, we don't want to see these things. They have a negative effect on our biodiversity. And sometimes it takes us telling the nurseries, what they should be selling. And like Thane said, discussing it with experts, discussing it as a community so that we're all aware of what those endangered species or what those invasive species are is so important.
And I'll just add from a city perspective too, again, going back to systems and collaboration. And so one, it's important for us that our parks division, our parks are number 4 in the world, right, in the nation. And so we want to increase that. And so that means the work and innovation that's happening there. And so for the first time ever in the forestry division, they've created a position for someone to be responsible for caring for public forests. And what that also means is through the stewardship program, they are training volunteers to go out and identify and remove invasive species. And so these are the type of collaborations that we want to see at the community level, so people do understand what is a danger. And Civic Garden, they are also teaching people as well, like what not to plant or being able to get the right things at that location. So again, collaboration is important amongst organizations.
Yeah. So that's the city directly responding to a problem we have. That's really interesting. Thane, our cities around the world, they're going to keep expanding because, both population and size, there's going to be a creep. What accommodations can we make, since we kind of know this is an issue now? Maybe 30, 40 years ago, they didn't make those accommodations. What can we do now to accommodate wildlife around us?
That is a good point. On one hand, urbanization could be a good thing, and it would leave some open space that's not completely crowded with people everywhere. So that's an interesting perspective. Here in Cincinnati, I think there's good examples, case studies of what can be done. Our network of bike trails is growing and extremely popular. You could go right now to any part of it from Wasson Way all the way up toward Loveland, and there'd be an awful lot of people on those. Those, of course, have a greenway attached to them. In many of those areas, through the county parks, the city parks, are planting native plants along those. It creates sort of a native corridor for pollinators, which is pretty fun in an area that really was just most of it an abandoned railroad track and was nothing but, creosote logs and stones. When you think of the rebirth of our riverfront, which is just going beautifully, that was pretty heavy industrial not that many decades ago, and starting originally with, say, Yateman's Cove and out to Friendship Park, but now coming all the way down to Smale Park. A wonderful space for the outdoors and for families to be able to get outdoors and appreciate the river valley and its beauty. And very shortly, that will connect through the bike trail all the way out to Lunkin, that then connects to the whole statewide trail system. So those kinds of things are moving in the right direction. Also, a thing I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to, the next day you get a chance, it doesn't take all day, it could be an hour, is to get outside. I know we all stay busy. There's more to do than there ever was. And yet our area has just the greatest parks. There's some that people might not know. Caldwell Nature Preserve. If you look on a map, you'll think, well, that can't be much. That's on North Bend Road and the Mill Creek. Let me tell you, that is the best 100-acre park in this whole town. It is something. A guy named Caldwell back in 1919 left it. And frankly, it's the park time forgot, because it has things there's nowhere else in this town. Giant beech trees, big pawpaw forest. It's just a wonderful little park that even if you only have 1 hour, you could experience it and be quite surprised how much beauty's there.
See, what I love about this conversation is we're rediscovering things that we probably just drive by and don't necessarily take and stop and take the time to appreciate that. It's really amazing. Joe, you've studied how humans use infrastructure to support wildlife. What are some of the best practices in allowing animals to cohabitate in our cities?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think always we're reimagining best practices and thinking critically about what's there. But let me tell you a couple that stand out to me. I think the first is to be inclusive. I think one thing that we need to be sure that we're doing when we're trying to promote wildlife in our urban environments where we have a lot of human beings is we need to make sure that we bring everybody to the table, right? We don't want to make past mistakes where certain groups are maybe being excluded from those conversations or decisions are being made for them. We want to make sure that we're building partnerships in our community and that we're listening to people's voices, or we're listening to their concerns and we're communicating with them. Another thing that I think is really important is that we need to be forward thinking. We can't simply just look at the world as we see it today and imagine that everything is going to be fine and that there's not going to be new problems arise or new conflicts. Again, I think anyone who's been following the news or the world's going on around us, it seems like crisis is a moving target, and there's always a new crisis, and there's always a new thing to be worried about. And so the folks who are managing our city forests, the folks who are managing and promoting the wildlife in our cities need to be thinking about what's on the horizon. They need to be anticipating conflicts, and they need to be doing the outreach that's so important, like talking to our youth, talking to our communities, and making sure that everyone has the information at hand so that when the situation changes, everyone's aware of what bats are, what salamanders are, what eagles are, and they appreciate them, they're excited about them, and if there's a conflict, they're willing to work on it together with those species. I think maybe one thing that I'd like to say is we want to think big. I think that one thing that stands out to me from this conversation is we've had several people mentioned by name, right? There's been individuals who have been in a position to donate land, to make a water conservation plan. I think it's essential in 2023 to not fall into the mental trap that the biodiversity crisis is so big that I can't do anything about it. And there's a certain degree of logic to understanding that global problems can't be solved by Joe Johnson, but I think it's dangerous to say that, we can't do our individual parts, because small actions can go a long way. And to a certain extent, they're all we can control is our own actions. And so,
right. Because we're talking from the University of Cincinnati with the Cincinnati Zoo and Cincinnati City Council. These are big institutions, but yeah, what we're trying to do is try to talk to people that what can we all do and how do we we're all part of this issue. Mika, I'd love for you to react to some of Joe's comments there, if you could.
Yeah, I think it looks like workforce development is one layer of it. So when we're talking about young people being stewards of land, it's continuing to help support organizations that are doing that. I think it's the work of institutions like the Cincinnati Zoo who are going in and education is a part of the work that they're doing right on schoolyards, installing solar panels, so that that conversation and opportunity to educate is important. I think it also is something that will come up as we look at what does development projects look like and how are we incentivizing green space within development. And so how do we continue to have those type of conversations at the community level as well? So, for me, it becomes very intuitive and grassroots when we're talking about big ideas and distilling them down at the community level. So community councils are important in that and other ways that we are connecting with the community.
Appreciate that very much. We'll switch topics a little bit and get a little bit more macro to what we've been talking about. Thane, you talked a little bit about biodiversity and how that's so critical. Do we really have a crisis? And if we do, what does that mean to the average person?
Well, sadly and importantly, we do have a crisis. And I think people see that in their own lives. Anybody who's had a fairly long life like myself can remember days when things as common as insects were far more abundant than they are today. Many people might remember taking a summer trip and literally having to stop and clean your windshield because you ran into so many insects. And in many parts of the world, those days are gone. To start to say that little organisms like insects or bats or freshwater animals are being reduced in number is certainly indicative of more than just the fact that there are less insects and others. It's indicative that the system, of course, is having to change for lots of reasons. And those are very important things for us to be aware of and be involved in. I would say the heartening other side of that is there are more and more ways on every single level, whatever skills you have, to be involved in conservation. Right here in Ohio and in the tri-state, whether organizations where you could sign up and participate and learn, like Cincinnati Nature Center, Parks has programs, County Parks has programs, the Ohio chapter of the Nature Conservancy is part of the Nature Conservancy, a remarkable conservation program around the world, but also a big program right here in Ohio, particularly over in Southeast Ohio with the edge of Appalachia. That's a very unique ecosystem. And they run remarkable programs at their center out in Adams County. And that's run in partnership between TNC and the Museum Center. So check their website out to see what programs are out there. There are a wide variety of the kinds of programs. It could be as simple as you or your family go and participate in a bird walk or a nature walk or even a frog walk, because this time of year you hear a lot of frogs calling, but a naturalist could tell you, well, that's not just one frog. There's actually a number of different frog species out there. Or you could take courses that are advanced naturalist training that would be taught by people like Joe, where, you know, if it's on bats, they have a real expert really teaching you about bats, not just a cursory piece. So these issues are challenging, but there's good work being done on it. There's a lot of restoration being done here in the 21st century. What does that mean? Well, areas that once were lush either got poached out or overgrazed, and folks have come in and say, you know what, we're gonna turn this around and save that. And that happens everywhere from, frankly, in America, New England was clear cut in the 1700s, and today it's mostly forested because it's easier to farm in other states. Nature's built to be resilient, and those same stories happen all over the world. So biodiversity can make a comeback if enough of that biodiversity still exists in that area. So protecting what's there, working smarter around it is really the way forward.
Mika, what can policymakers do about it? This issue that Thane has like outlined, this issue, this big problem we got.
Yeah, I think for us, it's being accountable to our Green Cincinnati plan. It's making sure that we're institutionalizing that in every decision that we look at. And so that's actually something that my office led on, in the same way that we look at, you know, like Plan Cincinnati. That language should also be from Green Cincinnati plan should also be parallel to that. It's being accountable to things like, you know, climate view that is allowing us to understand where are we actually making reductions in the city. And so I think it's, again, how are we tracking and measuring what we are saying? And that is the next phase of this opportunity of the Green Cincinnati plan. And that takes not only policymakers, but it's going to take organizations to help champion these recommendations as well.
Thank you very much, Mika, for that. Joe, Thane talked about this, you know, the certifications that people can get. There's this concept of a citizen scientist that I'd like to explore a little bit. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's something that, you know, I mean, I've started, since I learned about this topic, I've started to consider myself one, you know, because I do have those apps, and I love birding. And when I go see outside my window and I see like a discolored or an albino squirrel, I get like really, you know, psyched about it. What is a citizen scientist, and how can people really like embrace that kind of concept?
Yeah, so they come in different levels of commitment, right? So, but at its fundamental core, what it is it's people who aren't in the ivory tower of research being able to access research, to be able to access the scientific method and the way that we generate knowledge. And so we've talked about iNaturalist already. If you're going out there and you're taking a photo and you're putting it on iNaturalist, you're a citizen scientist, because not only is it identifying that plant for you, but now you have put that plant, you put a pin on a map. And what that is it's helping us understand and track our distribution of organisms across space and time. So that's what we mean when we talk about citizen science at its core. It's this participation in the scientific method, and it's the access to it. But it can obviously, like many other things, right, the rabbit hole can go quite deep, right? You can get onto websites like Zooniverse, and you can participate in projects, say, maybe in Africa, where they have trail cameras throughout the environment, and you can help those scientists identify the animals on those trail cameras, because sometimes the data we collect are so big that we're maxed out in the research and our graduate students and in our labs, and we need your help. And so it's helping at times researchers really get the job done. And so it's making our process of science accessible, and it's inclusive in that way.
Thane, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the citizen scientist too, but I also got a question from the audience too that deals specifically with this in regard to the zoo. It says, I'm a Clifton resident, and I'd like to know if there are any opportunities to participate in a UC zoo-led citizen science project. I'd love to get my children involved in a real research project that is led by experts and could have a positive impact on our local community. So what opportunities are there that you guys deal with? I mean, we could talk about that, but also, again, this broader concept of the citizen scientist.
Well, sure, there are lots of opportunities. I think of a wonderful program that the zoo's been involved with Cincinnati Public Schools and Rockdale Academy right here in Avondale over the last few years. It's the Urban Learning Garden that's at Rockdale Academy. And we had lots of partners on that, Cincinnati Children's, Procter & Gamble, Kroger. As the joke goes, the zoo doesn't have any money, but we can sure plant plants. And we took a 1 acre site in cooperation with the administration at Rockdale and the teachers and the kids and families, and created a really neat participatory garden over there. And if you want to be inspired, you could just go walk it. It's right there on Rockdale and Wilson Avenues. But also you could go during the school year and see kids really interacting with it. And it's a neat opportunity. It has different aspects to it. As Mika says, we put in solar panels to help run the greenhouse. The neat thing about it in that case is at the zoo, we have to keep the animals in, but we can let the plants go wild. And our horticulture team basically operates under the idea of if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. So we're involved in many ways throughout the community. We've got a big one coming out with the Reds Community Fund next week that's up in Madisonville. Those are ones where people can participate. They're not as much research based, but they are certainly hands-on based, which can be valuable too. In terms of research, we do behavioral research and reproductive research here at the zoo. Those are conducted by our scientists, but some of those in terms of record keeping of animal behavior, which used to be done, on a clipboard, but today it's done on a pad, is something that people can participate in. So take a look at the zoo's website and our education program. But Joe, I'm sure since you're a researcher, you know of a bunch of opportunities where people might be able to plug in.
Yeah, and to simply focus for just a moment on some of my work for anybody who's interested in participating in citizen science work about bats, we have some things that we've recently started, and we have some things that are maybe a year or two out on the horizon. But I'll put in just a moment an email address into the chat. It's simply BATS at uc.edu. And if you have a bat house, if you want a bat house and need to know how to build one so that you can help us monitor it, if you have bats in your attic, in anywhere, right, the shutters, your windows, and you want to help us learn about those animals, reach out to me at bats@uc.edu. And one thing that we're also interested in working on that we're coordinating with the zoo that we're building at the moment is trying to develop an urban wildlife citizen science program where we leverage sensors, right, and technology. We understand that some of our wildlife is hidden, right? It's out at night, perhaps. So it's out while we're sleeping or at work. And we want to leverage those things like trail cameras, bat detectors, song recorders for birds, so that you can make some of that nature accessible for everybody when they can't go outside, although we definitely want everyone to. And so some of that stuff is on the horizon.
And Amy has put all of these resources that we've talked about in the chat and including that email address. So I think that's a really cool opportunity for people right there. Mika, we've got another question from the audience too, and this is probably a little bit more specific, so we'll try to broaden it a little bit. But so it says, can we talk about how you balance public safety concerns and biodiversity concerns? And this one is specifically in the context of parks such as hyperlocal Burnett Woods. So I think what this question is getting at is, sometimes our parks have some crime problems, and we want to be greener. How do we balance these needs for the public?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think one, as a city, we are committed to making sure green space is accessible, first and foremost, and even signing on, the mayor to, we promise to be within a half a mile, you can walk and access the green space. So that's one thing. And we know that there are public benefits from that, which not only include health benefits, mental health benefits, but the socialization and community. So I think when we are thinking about third spaces in our community and things that make us safer, things that creating spaces intentionally to make people feel welcome. I think that's what we continue to focus on. Safety, I think that is another issue and aspect of the work that we have to do at the city level. But I think when we make green space accessible to all. That is really the place that we want to work from.
Thanks a lot for that, Mika. So, as we, start to end this conversation, look, I've learned a ton. I've learned a lot of new resources that I can use. What I've really enjoyed about this conversation is that it's all of us are right here and we're talking about something that is local. It's a global issue, but it's something that we're all able to impact and effectuate change here on a local level, because we're all right here. So there's actually real tangible things that we can do about it. And it's not someplace, like over there. I was just in the Galapagos. Great place. It's super important to our conservation efforts, but I mean, there's not much I can do there. Joe, what role does a research university like the University of Cincinnati play in this topic? Because there's a lot of research universities around the country, and they can all play a role in their backyard. But UC, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, or a great question. So one of the missions of the university is to create an educated and engaged citizenry. And so for us as researchers, as employees of the university, to fulfill that mission, we need to go out, we need to discover knowledge, and we need to share it with everybody. And so for me, one thing that I've really adopted as a mission for myself is to learn more about the plant and animal species that are here in Cincinnati. Of course, I focus on bats. And then what I do is I try to get everybody as excited about it as I possibly can. And so it's easy for me to love bats, but I think really there's a lot of thirst and appetite amongst the people of our city and our community to learn and to hear from us as researchers. So I try and go out, I joke, to preach the gospel of bats. And that's not just within the walls of the university classrooms, but that's in our libraries, in our K through 12 schools, talking to our local representatives and local government in our local parks. So really it's about being a partner. It's about supporting each other, right? And helping any way we can, because it's really going to be a group and a team effort.
Absolutely, it's a team effort. Mika, again, you're a legislator. You can actually take things that you learn and put it into public policy. What are you going to take from this conversation that, that's going to impact the work that you do?
What I get excited about is the opportunity to convene and as a legislator, and sometimes even if it's not a direct policy action, it's the opportunity to get thought leaders around the table and creating that space of engagement where real innovation, I believe, exists. And so when we're thinking about systems change, it's the folks on this call that will be able to tap into, well, here are the goals at the city and what role do each of us play in getting there. And so I think there's intentionality around pipelines, workforce development, all of the things that are part of this conversation of conserving our environment. So for me, that is what's exciting, in addition to the Green Cincinnati plan and the things that are direct policy implications.
Absolutely. And we're so thrilled that you were able to join us on this because, you have a huge voice here in Cincinnati. Mika, so thank you. Thane, I'm going to give you the last word here. You have seen lots of partnerships work. If we're really trying to figure out this urban wildlife biodiversity issue and figure out how to move forward, what do you think is the best way in which to do it? Obviously, the people around, on this panel are all leaders and thought leaders around an issue. But what have you seen that works, and what do you hope can work here for the city of Cincinnati?
Well, you certainly hit the nail on the head. I think the best model is effective partnerships. There are many of those in our region, and increasingly that's what's working for conservation. Conservation around the world historically used to be pretty much a top-down phenomenon. Learned people came to realize there was a problem, and they said, okay, we need to go in there and either buy that land and kick everybody out, such as national parks, or we need to go in and explain to everybody in rural areas they don't know what they're doing. And of course, that is a terrible system, because nobody wants some smarty pants from the zoo or the city or the university or the government to show up and tell them that they don't know what they're doing. And it sounds silly today, but that is really a lot of what conservation was historically. The irony in that is everybody in that discussion is probably right, that, okay, the folks did know a better way to do it, but they communicated it badly. And the local guys who have lived out there for generations, whether those are farmers or people living in the third world, have been figuring out problems an awful long time. So the secret is to develop effective partnerships where people learn to listen to one another. That sounds easy, and of course it's not easy. Everybody on this call knows it. Mika probably most of all. Trying to get everybody to cooperate is a challenging thing. These days, I don't even understand why we have these crazy culture war issues that usually are on topics nobody actually gives a hoot about. We don't need to ban books. Everybody knows that. Bigger issues are the opportunity to work together. I like the slogan from, I don't know, 15 years ago when the theme seemed to be, yes, we can. And I applaud Mika for stepping up as a young person and say, I can play a leadership role in the Green Cincinnati plan, and we can do it here. Let's do it. Let's not talk about how we can't do it. Let's go. And that's terrific. And of course, the university plays an outsized role in our community. They're the biggest employer, and they are a research university. My oldest daughter got her PhD in developmental biology through UC, so it plays a huge role. Those kind of partnerships right there are essential, getting more people to be talking together across these lines. Other great ones are local institutions, lots of them cooperating one with another. The zoo's great strength is we have a huge number of visitors, so we reach a lot of people. Smaller organizations can do things in depth. If people are not familiar with the Cincinnati Nature Center, terrific place to visit. It's 1,000 acres. You can wander in the woods, but they also do research. The person who wrote in from Clifton said, how can my kids do real research? I suggest call my friend, Dr. Corey Christopher. He leads the research program for the Cincinnati Nature Center, and I guarantee you they'll find something you get plugged in with. So those kinds of partnerships are really the way forward. Again, historically, I think a lot of times people working on the same cause were in conflict with one another. There was this zero-sum thinking of, well, I don't know, anybody who gives $1 to the Nature Center won't give it to the Nature Conservancy, or they won't give it to the zoo. I can tell you from a long career that is not the case. As momentum builds and people get involved, there's more support, not less support, and more good programs. And there are many of those that exist. If you're interested in this topic, spend a half an hour on the web, follow one stream to another, some of the groups, some of the people we've talked to, some of the resources that Joe spoke about. And speaking of Joe, I look forward to getting to know you because this was fun, and I don't know enough about bats.
Oh, dangerous statement, Thane. I look forward to it. That was great.
Well, I want to thank all three of you, Thane Maynard, Joe Johnson, Mika Owens. This has been an unbelievable conversation. And, you know, here's the thing. It's what I like, Thane, what you said, it's really this bottom up approach. That's, I think, what we can do. I mean, it's out of the ivory tower. It's all of us. We're just regular folks, and we can try to actually make a difference. So we'll see how we can do that. This is our final Flashpoint of this season. We'll have a new season coming up soon with a new semester. You'll be able to watch this conversation. It'll be archived on the Digital Futures YouTube channel. So please check that out. You can see all of our past conversations there too. We look forward to having you on the next one too. Thank you all for joining us.